It's pretty heartening that there's been so much research on progressive MS in particular, and I'm always excited to share with you new things that are at least on the horizon when it comes to progressive MS and how we might get that under control. Hello, and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam. I've been living with MS for almost 41 years. And in that time, I've learned a lot by just what it takes to keep this channel going. I've been looking at all the current research that comes across my screen, and there's quite a bit. One of the things that I do really appreciate is that we are looking now at what exactly differentiates progressive MS from the earlier stage of relapsing MS. There are a number of good treatment options for people who are diagnosed with relapsing MS. They can get that under control pretty well and really get the relapses down to where you can live your life and not really worry about it too much. But by the time you've got progressive MS, you've sustained some damage, and your big hope is that it won't get any worse. But we have no guarantees about that. So it's always nice to know that the scientists and researchers out there are still looking at ways to get that under control, to slow it down, to stop it in its tracks, and maybe even reverse it. I've done a lot of videos on remyelination, which definitely would help us with progressive MS, although perhaps at this stage not as much as it would help someone who maybe has had relapsing for a while. If your damage is not very extensive or long-term, you can reverse that much more easily than if you've had damage to the point where axons are totally gone. And I think where a lot of us are, if you've had MS for decades, you're probably in that second category, unfortunately, where the axons are just gone. And while remyelination might become a thing, regeneration of neurons that are just totally destroyed, I think we're a long ways out from that. But be that as it may, I want to keep you up to date on what I'm finding with research into progressive MS, what might cause it, and how we might stop it. So let's take a look at a couple of articles that I found. The first article that we'll look at was from Multiple Sclerosis News today. It was published on October 20th of 2025. Targeting abnormal brain cells may be key to treating progressive MS. Abnormal brain cells, known as disease-associated radioglia or DARGs or DARGs, may play a key role in driving chronic inflammation in people with progressive forms of multiple sclerosis, a new study shows. Based on the finding, researchers are now working to better understand the biology of DARGs, with an eye toward one day creating treatments designed to neutralize these disease-driving cells. We're now working to explore the molecular machinery behind DARGs and test potential treatments. Our goal is to develop therapies that either correct DARG dysfunction or eliminate them entirely. Alexandra Nickhays, PhD, co-lead author of the study at the University of Cambridge, said in a university news story. If we're successful, this could lead to the first truly disease-modifying therapies for progressive MS, offering hope to thousands living with this debilitating condition. The study, Integrated Omics, reveals disease-associated radioglia-like cells with epigenetically dysregulated interferon response in multiple sclerosis, was published in Neuron. MS is driven by inflammation in the brain. Most people with MS are initially diagnosed with relapsing remitting disease, which is marked by relapses where symptoms suddenly worsen, followed by periods of remission where symptoms ease. Over time, the disease may develop into secondary progressive MS or SPMS, which is marked by symptoms that get gradually worse over time, even in the absence of relapse activity. MS is driven by inflammation in the brain, and the gradual disability worsening that defines SPMS is believed to specifically be due to chronic or smoldering brain inflammation. But the specific types of cells that drive smoldering inflammation in progressive MS have been hard to pin down. To gain more insight, researchers collected skin cells from 3 people with SPMS as well as 3 people without MS, who served as controls. Through a series of biochemical manipulations, the researchers reprogrammed the skin cells into induced neural stem cells, or INSCs, which are essentially stem cells that can grow into different types of brain cells. While the researchers changed the cell type, they took care to preserve the cell's epigenetic markings, that is, the changes in DNA markers unique to each individual that controls gene activity. Dark cells, they say, are hyper-responsive to inflammatory signaling molecule. When the researchers examined the INSCs, they found that some cells from SPMS patients were taking on an unusual set of characteristics. These cells were termed DARGs because they looked like radial glia cells, which are specialized cells normally present in the developing brain that act as scaffolding to help give the brain its structure. Healthy radial glial cells are able to grow into other types of brain cells, but the DARGs showed signs of senescence or cellular aging, and although the DARGs weren't growing, they were by no means inactive. In fact, these unusual cells were hyperresponsive to an inflammatory signaling molecule called interferon. When the cells were exposed to interferon, they would release additional inflammatory signaling molecules to trigger inflammation and senescence in nearby cells. Our research has revealed a previously unappreciated cellular mechanism that appears central to the chronic inflammation and neurodegeneration driving the progressive phase of the disease, said Stefano Pluchino, PhD, joint senior author of the study at Cambridge. Essentially, what we've discovered are glial cells that don't just malfunction, they actively spread damage. They release inflammatory signals that push nearby brain cells to age prematurely, fueling a toxic environment that accelerates neurodegeneration. And it kind of reminds me, I know this is a weird connection to make, but when leaves start to turn in the fall, and we're seeing that right now, outside my window, in fact, I understand that when a tree starts to turn, it signals to other trees in the area of the same type, and they start to turn. It's very interesting, but it can spread, and I'm wondering if, I know in a weird kind of way, maybe it's a similar sort of thing going on. There's a signaling that happens that tells other cells, oh, okay, we need to do what you're doing. Further supporting the idea that DARGs are involved in smoldering inflammation, analyses of brain tissue from people with progressive MS indicated that DARGs are commonly located in areas that show signs of chronic inflammation. Our findings reveal that DARGs constitute a discrete subset of disease-associated cells predominantly localized to lesion niches in the MS brain. Their spatial enrichment, alongside glial activation and tissue damage, suggests a potential role in sustaining chronic inflammation, the researchers wrote. They added that these findings suggest that targeting this cellular axis may provide new avenues for therapeutic intervention aimed at disrupting disease progression in progressive MS. So once again, here's another way of looking at it. You're going to disrupt a mechanism that is causing, or at least contributing to, the progression of multiple sclerosis. It sounds very interesting. This article is also in Multiple Sclerosis News today. It was published on October 16th of 2025. And it's TR1X, I guess they probably go by Trix, gets okay for first in-human trial of TRX319 for progressive MS. Developer also receives $50 million in financing to advance cell therapy. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has given Trix the green light to launch a first-in-human clinical trial of TRX319, a cell therapy candidate designed to restore immune balance in people with progressive forms of MS. With FDA clearance now granted for its investigational new drug, or IND, application, Trix said it plans to begin phase 1/2A clinical testing of TRX319 early next year. So that would be 2026. The company also has obtained $50 million in financing, which will support the upcoming trial as well as an ongoing clinical trial in Crohn's disease. A lot of MS medications also are repurposed for Crohn's disease, or vice versa, I've noticed. We are pleased to receive IND clearance for TRX319 and to advance our second program into the clinic in early 2026, David DeVries, co-founder and CEO of Trix, said in a company press release. For DeVries, this financing further underscores investor confidence in our differentiated allogeneic TR1 and CAR-TR1 TREG strategy, the progress and data generated to date, and our continued capital efficiency. And I did a video on TREGs fairly recently. I'll put a link to that below so that you can see what that's all about. MS is caused by self-reactive antibodies that target the myelin sheath, a fatty covering around nerve fibers. This triggers inflammation and results in myelin and nerve cell damage, eventually leading to a range of MS symptoms. Antibodies, including self-reactive ones, are produced by immune cells called B cells. CAR T-cell therapies take advantage of immune T cells and their ability to mount immune attacks against specific targets, leading to their elimination. The approach involves modifying T cells in the lab to produce a chimeric antigen receptor, or CAR, a man-made receptor that binds to specific proteins on the surface of target cells. TRX319 aims to restore immune balance in progressive MS. Unlike other CAR T-cell therapies that use T cells from patients, TRX319 is allogeneic, meaning it sources T cells from healthy donors. These T cells are modified to produce a CAR, or CAR, that targets CD19, a protein found on B cells, and mimic the function of type 1 regulatory, or TR1 T cells, which maintain immune balance by controlling excessive inflammation. The T cells in TRX319 are expanded and stored before being infused into patients, creating a so-called off-the-shelf product, or one that doesn't need to be developed for a specific patient, which we could see might be very useful. Although I assume that it also comes with the whole donor matching and possible rejection risks that we have to deal with all of the therapies that require infusion of somebody else's cells. By targeting and eliminating B cells, TRX319 is expected to restore immune balance, prevent autoimmune attacks, and slow or even stop progression of the disease, according to Trix. Bruce Cree, MD, PhD, a professor in MS in the Department of Neurology at the University of California, San Francisco, noted that this is a novel strategy. An approach that targets B cell biology while actively modulating inflammatory signaling within a regulatory cell therapy framework, is a distinct and promising hypothesis in progressive MS, Cree said. In preclinical tests, TRX-319 showed it could reach the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, where MS causes damage to nerve cells. TRX-319 eliminated CD9 positive B cells and released IL-10, a molecule that helps control inflammation and is produced in high amounts by TR1 T cells. Via its action on IL-10, the therapy reduces the activation of self-reactive T cells as well as microglia, the brain-resident immune cells that are thought to play a key role in disease progression in the absence of relapses, the company noted. So that's very nice to know that this therapy may also work in the kind of smoldering MS that's independent of relapses, and that would be very important because in the beginning all they were talking about was inflammation. And I thought, okay, well, that's pretty good for people who are early on in their course, but as we go further down the line, if we've had it for decades, the inflammation is not the major component of our disease. It's the smoldering MS, or the progression independent of relapse activity, or PIRA, that we have to worry about. So I'm glad to see that this therapy is going to target that as well. Jennifer Graves, MD, PhD, head of neuroimmunology at the University of California, San Diego, noted that progressive MS remains a major clinical challenge. Patients can accumulate disability outside of relapses, and therapeutic options are limited. The open-label Phase 1/2A trial is expected to open at multiple locations, so we'll be keeping an eye out for that. Its primary goal is to assess how safe and well-tolerated TRX-319 is at increasing doses. Secondary and exploratory measures include pharmacological studies and changes in clinical disability and biomarkers. And in conclusion, they say the exploration of new approaches, such as this first-in-human study of an allogeneic CAR TR1 T-cell therapy that carefully evaluates its potential with clear safety and pharmacodynamic objectives, is timely and important, said Graves, who also serves as Vice Chair of Human Clinical Research at the university. I look forward to studying TRX-319 in this dose escalation trial to further understand the potential of this cell therapy, Cree added. And one thing we don't hear about in this article is what possible side effects it might have. Maybe that's a little bit too early in the process to even know. But they have done preclinical work. They've done work in mice, I'm sure. And I don't know what the results were of that, but they must have been promising enough that we're going to get a chance to trial it in humans, which could be pretty exciting. And this article is a little older. It was published on July 2nd in 2025, also from Multiple Sclerosis News Today. It's called MS Quiet Progression. Expert discusses new research and treatment, says more work needed to address disease worsening without relapses. And we've heard that one all along, haven't we? More work is definitely needed. Scientists have made significant advances in treating multiple sclerosis in recent decades, with a number of treatments for the neurodegenerative disease approved or in development. But one issue that's been more challenging to address, researchers say, is MS quiet progression, when there aren't any new visible lesions or relapses, but symptoms slowly get worse. Multiple Sclerosis News Today spoke with Regina Berkowitz, MD, PhD, a renowned MS specialist in West Hollywood, California, about the latest development in targeting MS quiet progression, as well as the role of lifestyle factors. This interview was excerpted and lightly edited for clarity. And before we begin the interview, I just thought I'd share the photograph that they've posted of Dr. Regina Berkowitz. And the interviewer says, what are some of the current trends and developments in multiple sclerosis research that patients should know about? And Dr. Berkowitz says, in my opinion, it develops in a few different directions. And without going much into the details, I would say that the main focus seems to be on addressing the question of progression. At this point, we have been very successful over the last 20 years in learning how to address acute inflammation in MS, prevent exacerbations, relapses, and new lesions on MRI. What we have been less successful in is addressing that quiet progression that could occur nevertheless and would result very frequently in disability not associated with the exacerbations, not associated with the new lesion formation. As an MS specialist, I frequently encounter patients who say, so, doctor, you said I had no new lesions. I have no activity on MRI, and obviously I didn't have relapses. I didn't have any need for the use of steroids. And yet, you see yourself, and I'm experiencing it every day, that I've progressed. I no longer can work in my full capacity. I no longer can keep my full-time job. And it's beyond the regular aging, because that could be a young individual. It could be an individual in their 50s or 40s. And that's obviously something that needs to be addressed very urgently at this point. And that's why I'm really happy that there are different directions going into evaluation of that quiet inflammation and progression not associated with relapse activity. I have a PhD in pharmacology, and that's why I look at it from the standpoint of pharmacology. And I would say that I'm very happy to see that those developments are in different pharmacological classes addressing potentially different targets. And that is very promising because, unfortunately, the truth is that clinical development is extremely unpredictable. So we can see that a medication can get to a phase 3 trial, which is usually expected to be the last step before the FDA approves the medication. And even us getting to the end of phase 3 doesn't mean that this medication will make it to the market. And how well we know all this. We really have been frustrated by that. We wait so patiently for things to make it through the clinical trial process, only to discover that they're not going to end up making it to market after all. And why is that? Why don't they make it to market? Because it could be that the planned efficacy would not be confirmed. And the medication will have to be, after an enormous amount of effort, time, and money is invested into the development of it, will have to be abandoned completely, even though there were numerous positive publications. And remember, no medication will come to the last stages, phase 3, until it succeeds in all the previous steps. And I think it's important for people to understand that a positive animal study is just the beginning. It's so far from the endpoint of the FDA approval. So a positive animal study eventually leads to different controlled studies, and then phase 1 study on humans, and then phase 2. And every phase takes time, and every phase has a risk of not being successful and being the end of the development of that product. So that is why I really welcome those many different directions, that out of those many directions, hopefully 2 or 3, or maybe even only 1, hopefully will be successful. I think she's describing the process very accurately from our perspective too. We've watched these trials go forward, and many of them just seem to kind of fall off the conveyor belt of progress, and they don't ever go anywhere, or the timing is so long. It seems like there's like a 3A and a 3B. Sometimes the FDA is not quick to move on something even when it seems to be successful. There are a lot of factors at play beyond the clinical trials. I think we only know just a tiny bit of everything that goes into getting a medication approved for the clinic. Are there any lifestyle factors that play a role in quiet progression? Yes, absolutely. I would say that this is especially important as we are waiting for the new medications to be approved, because that is where we have very little impact. We cannot speed up that process. but what is completely in our hands is how we live our lives and what choices we make in our daily lives. So we can do on a day-to-day basis, the diet, the level of physical activity is a huge factor, probably comparable to the effects of successful treatment. One thing I can tell you, as a practicing MS specialist, that without that commitment, no treatment will be successful if a patient does not address lifestyle factors. And gosh, you've heard me say that on this channel countless times, and I'm really, really glad that we have an actual doctor here that's echoing the words. I could have actually written these myself. And she continues, if a patient is on the most efficacious treatment but engages in minimal physical activity, faces minimal intellectual challenges, and eats a poor diet with a high inflammatory impact, with constant stress, smoking, being overweight, unfortunately, all of that will be working completely against any good that medication can do. So sometimes it's easier to say it than do it. But I would say that I usually recommend that my patients start with very simple goals and feel good about achieving those goals instead of committing to, let's say, twice a week exercise to the point of exhaustion. I would rather suggest that they exercise daily for 5 minutes. Anyone can spare 5 minutes, right? And it doesn't matter what type of exercise you do, because the level of performance will be different based on how limited the abilities are, right? It could be any type of exercise or movement you can do. If you can move your arms, then exercise your arms. And if you have limited abilities, just exercise within that limited ability. But do that because the most important thing at this stage of MS is to preserve what you have, because we might have better and more promising medications, and preservation of current functions and improvement to your ability through your lifestyle is a huge investment for the future, I would say. The interviewer asks a very important question. Are there any specific dietary recommendations for multiple sclerosis? They are a little bit controversial in terms of the fact that not everyone would agree with everything, and not every person can follow every recommendation. I would not say that one size fits all. This is not the case. Then there are personal food sensitivities, and some foods will not be recommended for some people. So everything needs to be discussed with your treating physician and perhaps a nutritionist. Restriction of salt and sugar is always a very important first step, and I would say that hydration cannot be overestimated. Proper hydration is very, very crucial. Next, the interviewer asks, do you have any advice for finding a good neurologist for people with MS? And she says, ideally, MS should be treated by an MS specialist or neurologist who has extensive experience in treating MS and has treated multiple MS patients. And if I were to look at a choice of different neurologists, I would say to try to choose the one that is open-minded, that is not limited to the choice of the medications they prescribe to 1, 2, or 3, but has the open mind to consider different medications for different patients. The ideal specialist is someone who will be serving you personally and not treating you with a cookie-cutter approach. Well, that's well said, even though it kind of almost throws the medical community under the bus a little bit. I do see her point entirely. Some neurologists are a lot more open-minded and willing to try new things, or even better, listen to the patient, so that when they do prescribe something, it's with the full consent and participation of the patient. Finally, the interviewer asks her if there's anything else that she'd like to add, and she says, I think that the current situation in MS research development is very promising. I'm very much looking forward to many new DMTs with new unique mechanisms being approved. I also think that within the spectrum of already available DMTs, we can do a lot of good if we implement the open mind approach and remain realistic in assessing DMT risks versus risks of inadequately treated MS. I would like to finish on an optimistic note and say that with the help of your publications, everyone should understand that we need to do everything in our power to prevent MS activity and progression now, so that by the time our bright future is here and the new medications become available, our MS patients are at their best possible level of functioning. And I could not agree with her more. Well, I don't know, to be excited about something that may or may not happen anytime real soon, and even when it does, may or may not benefit me directly. I guess you have to have sort of an altruistic attitude, and thankfully, I kind of do. I'd like to see this become a reality at some point because I know there are a lot of people who are not as far along in the course of their MS as I am, and they could very much benefit from this knowledge that's coming from all the new research. In the meantime, I think we just need to be patient. It's hard. I will admit that. It's very, very hard. And as the months and years go on, as I've had this channel, I think I was only like 39 years or 38 years with MS. Now I'm going to be in 41 pretty soon, 41 years with MS. And I can see that it's going to continue on for quite a while. And maybe the story will remain pretty much the same. Tons of things on the horizon, nothing in the clinic yet that's really going to do me any good. But I don't care. I'm going to continue to be optimistic because what I can be doing and what I encourage you to be doing is just take really good care of our general health, whether that be exercise, whether that be diet, whether that be some other symptom management we can be doing. Just keep yourself feeling as healthy as you can and keep your symptoms as managed as you can so that your quality of life is as good as it can be. And hopefully someday we'll actually be able to take advantage of some of this research that's been happening. It may even do us some good. You never know. Well, that's all I have for you. And until my next video, I'm going to say it again. Just keep taking really good care of yourself. And I'll see you again in my next video.